Yesterday marked the 5-year anniversary of when the lockdowns from COVID-19 pandemic began. Weren't those fun times? We started using terms like social distancing and sort of had a plan for how to begin to manage it. And then at some point, we just drifted from one plan to another so many times, and it's been so many ways that I wonder if we might benefit from a plan, not from social distancing, but what about a plan for social reconnecting, for social healing, for social processing, for social good that come out of a time like this? Some of it is understanding what we've been through and sort of being able to kind of give some time and space for how that affected us. This week, the New York Times published 30 graphs that show how the pandemic did just that, how it affected us. We're not going to do all 30 of those today, but a few of those I thought were worth mentioning. The first one shows that how we all started immediately spending a lot more time at home. And that probably is not news to anybody, but at the same time, that affected us differently. Some of us were almost entirely alone during that time. Some of us had lots of people around us. And I remember at one point, one of our family members said, "You're always here." And we said, "We feel the same way." So in that, a recognition that this has affected us all in different ways. At first, people held on to their jobs, and then record numbers of people quit them, and that has become known as the Great Resignation, and that might affect you kind of in different ways as well. One of the graphs shows a trend that was already happening, and that's one of the things that we see with the pandemic is accelerated some things. We bought $1 billion worth of alcohol that year in 2020. Confession is good for the soul, as Martha said. I think it's important for us to remember that loss is a piece of this for all of us. And we know that loss grief requires work. And creating space for that is one of the things that we know historically that we don't do coming out of pandemics. So we sort of just try to move on. So recognizing that we have lost something is important. And knowing what that is may not be as easy as it sounds, but certainly we know the loss of life is an important part of the mix. And that has affected all of us. 7 million people died. And we probably know someone. I remember distinctly a kind of touch point for me in the mix is when Dr. Becky Shadowin called me up in April of 2020 and said, "I'm going to have to write the regulations to decide who gets a ventilator and who doesn't. And I want to come into the church sanctuary and pray." And so I had to let her in, and so I just went to my office, and she was kneeling in the sanctuary, and I was kneeling in my office, and we were the only two people in the building. And of course, Becky was one of the ones who died, and the people that were, all those healthcare workers who were trying to do the right thing and save us. One final chart shows another of those trends that accelerated in 2020. We were already spending less time socializing. The New York Times thing said we spent more time at home, but we weren't hosting dinner parties. And that is tended to be true not just during the pandemic. It was, as you see, a trend happening before the pandemic and one that continues. And so there again, I wonder if in the mix, this might be one of the most important things to recognize of all. What skills do we need to figure out how to be social with one another? I don't know if you feel like you're struggling with that or have struggled with that. I think, again, one of the things that I think we all maybe need to admit is that we all did the best we could and maybe didn't know how to do what we were doing. And sometimes we got frustrated with each other. Some of us said we needed to do this, and some people said we need to do that. And that tends to be what happens. David Brooks wrote an article in 2020 with the title, "Pandemics Kill Compassion Too." Because the stress and the challenges and the need to keep each other safe is in conflict with how we have tended to socialize with one another. But I don't intend this moment really to be a point of discouragement, because I think there is actually in this a great deal of hope, as we maybe just are a little more intentional about what we might do to socialize, to re-socialize, to come back together, to recognize that times like these are not new in the history of the world. In fact, as we go through the Bible, one of the themes that we consistently see is we kind of don't know how to do this together. I mean, there's some relief in that, right? Jesus pulls these disciples together and he pours into them and they keep misunderstanding they don't get it. I think it's grace that the Bible leaves those stories in there. The first sort of story that kind of helps us understand ourselves. The first one, Adam and Eve, who don't even know how to be married in the perfect situation, right? In the ideal garden that God has created for them. They didn't get marriage right then. Does that make some of us feel better? Like, well, no wonder the rest of us struggle a little bit. They didn't have mothers-in-laws and fathers-in-laws, and they still had trouble. I'm going to let you sit with that for a second. Cain and Abel, with violence in the story, gives us a way of understanding the whole frame of Scripture from that point forward, where God goes looking for Cain, who has killed his brother, and Cain says, "What? Am I my brother's keeper?" And the biblical witness from that moment is, actually, yes, you are. And the rest of the Bible is us trying to live out what that looks like and what it might mean for us. And there's good news in that because we have a God who has consistently helped us figure out how to love him and love one another. And this is actually what it means to have faith. In many ways, we still struggle to understand the basic truth that we are our brothers and sisters' keepers, or to understand ourselves in these terms. But even in the scriptures we heard today, we hear, what good is it if your brother or sister is in this situation? It is a reframing not just of what we do, but how we see each other as brothers and sisters. We still struggle to understand that we are our brothers and sisters' keepers. At times we have made our religion out to be primarily a personal thing that disconnects us from the world. Maybe we think that if we go off by ourselves and get the God and me thing right, then the rest of it will kind of come back and follow automatically. But the Wesleyan tradition, which we've been digging into in this series, helps us understand that those two things have always come together for us. Our personal relationship with Jesus and our relationships with one another. And like a lot of things, what we do is say, instead of kind of relieving the tension between those two things, we live in the tension. We understand that those are dynamics that aren't always easy to navigate. And yet it has to be both things. It has to be personal, but it also has to be social. And that's woven into how God operates as Father, Son, and Spirit. And the dynamic life of God is now offered to us in our dynamic life with each other. We do have a responsibility to each other. We can't just go off by ourselves. It's not like we get faith right and then we get relationships right. It has to be a process of give and take along the way. We have a name for that. Our tradition has given us a name for that. You have to be careful with terms from the 1700s because they may not hit like they did back then. But we're going to put this up on the screen and we're going to work it through. The phrase is social holiness. Sometimes this gets confused with social justice, and it has that, as we'll see, a justice component. But it also helps us understand that what Jesus is trying to do is help us redefine all of our relationships with one another and our approach with each other. James boldly declares, faith without works is dead. The implication is that there's something to do in our relationships with each other. The assumption is that it's not just about what we believe, but how we act. That, in fact, what we say we believe very often is not what we truly believe. The true test of what we believe is what we do. This is helpful for me as people say, we need to be saying this or we should be saying that. I think also we should step back and say, well, what should we be doing? How should we be relating to each other? Those actions are important. Religion, again, has often gotten this wrong. We have sort of based our identities around right belief, where James would call us to base our lives together in right action, not orthodoxy, but orthopraxy, as it's been said. And that, in fact, sometimes we get to the right ways of thinking first by right ways of living, right ways of relating to each other. Micah makes a similar point. Is right belief really what God is looking for? Is the right ritual, the right religion really the thing? And Micah does a little thought experiment, sort of ramp it up, keep going until the only thing that's left to do is to offer your firstborn, which is so cliche. And then it says it's not even that. It's not so much about right religious ritual, but right relationship. What does the Lord require of you but to act right with each other? And to do so with God's mercy, to act in a certain way, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. Let's roll through that for a second. Since it is, John, it's one of my favorite scriptures too. To act justly means simply to do the right thing with each other. That sounds so simple, doesn't it? Or like maybe better said, to do right things. To consistently do right things. It gives us the grace to understand that we might, and maybe the humility to know that we might not know always what the right thing is. How do we navigate a pandemic? We may not know, but we're going to consistently do right things. And the scripture doesn't leave us hanging on what those right things might be. In fact, scripture gives us a way of understanding justice, which is the word there, how to act right. Another example is Exodus 22. It says, don't mistreat or oppress a foreigner. And one of the themes throughout the scriptures, throughout the Old Testament especially, is the widow, the foreigner, the other, the stranger. It tells us to treat people who are powerless a certain way, but it also tells us why. And it frames it in a relational sense. Exodus 22 says, do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner, for you were foreigners in Egypt. The Bible gives us an ethic of empathy, a way of thinking about one another where we have to pause and wonder what it's like to be them, not just what it's like to be us, or to use our experience to help us have compassion for each other. Justice in a biblical sense is never with a pointed finger, it's always with open hands, so that we can find relationship with one another. This is why Jesus tells us to pray for our enemies and to bless those who persecute us. Because our right action with each other is not dependent on their right action with us. This is the way God treats us. To act justly and to love mercy kind of go hand in hand. Mercy, or hesed, we did a whole series last fall on hesed. We had Choose Kindness shirts. Some of you are wearing them today. Because the biblical word hesed is something we need to rediscover. Hesed meaning God's long committed faithfulness to each other. I think this is a discovery that we could really latch hold of. One thing I feel like happened to all of us in the pandemic is it was kind of a rough time, and then there was the racial reckoning, and then there was a church split. I felt like, you kind of turned sideways, and it was like the only thing that could work here is for us to step back. It's just a human thing to say, I'm just gotta like step back from this. But God doesn't do that. God's long committed faithfulness to us steps in, and that's hesed. And it involves a longer-term commitment than we thought we were making maybe with each other. I remember thinking this during the pandemic. Man, we've been through some things. The tornado, gosh, in the midst of that. On the Sunday after the tornado, when I was sort of in shock and didn't realize it, and why in the world did I need to say anything but just to go to the altar and pray, maybe I felt like I had to have something to say. One of the things I learned is I don't always have to have something to say. But that morning, trying to figure out what to say, I said, I don't know that we knew we were making this commitment to each other when we moved into our houses, when we came to Bowling Green, when we just sort of kind of got here. What we discover in times of crisis like a tornado is like that's exactly what we were doing. We were committing to being in it with each other in a way that is deeper than we probably realized we had said yes to. That's hesed. I remember when we started the Foundry Christian Community Center. It was both a justice and a hesed thing. We realized we had left the west end of our city. The United Methodist presence had walked out as churches had closed, and we had not been good neighbors. And then we asked a hesed question, not just a justice one, but a hesed one, which was, what if we were to love the children of the west end of our city the same way that we love our children until the children of the west end of our city become our children? That's hesed, and it doesn't happen overnight. It takes doing the right things over and over and messing it up and going at it and just not giving up. Hesed is sort of just like you win because you don't ever quit. And that's how God wins with us. He just doesn't quit. Act justly, love mercy or kindness, and then walk humbly with God. Micah 6 makes the same claim that Jesus makes, that loving God and loving neighbor are just the same process. They go together. There's no such thing as private or personal religion. John Wesley made this point. He says this. This is, of course, in the 1700s. Solitary religion is not to be found in the scriptures. Holy solitaries is no more consistent with the gospel than holy adulterers. The gospel of Christ knows of no religion but social religion, no holiness but social holiness. Faith, working by love, is the length and breadth and depth and height of Christian perfection. Another way of saying it is that we're just going to have to figure out how to do this with each other as we figure out how to do it with God. And there's no other way. We can go, we can leave, we can argue, we can fight, but that doesn't change the fundamental reality of the world that we are in this together. Social holiness is sometimes confused with social justice, but we see it here in the broader scope. We're in a community and we're forming community together. Social holiness is a way of clarifying what faith is at the root of things. And so I'm going to put this on the screen. In fact, Christianity is learning to be with each other like God is with us until we are all whole again. Now, maybe that gives us a sense of what we're to be doing right now. And to recognize also with grace that we haven't always done this. Like the church doesn't always get this right. But this is our vision. This is our goal. That's what faith is learning how to be with each other the way God is with us until we are made whole again. A book that I've have found a lot of help with during these days is Greg Boyle's book, his latest one. He's written 4 now, and they're all good, about how to live sort of in a challenging place and do ministry with gangs in Los Angeles, and his experience of ministry there, the long-term commitment of simply being in it with God and with these people. And his latest book is Cherished Belonging, The Healing Power of Love in Divided Times. Go get this book. And he says, the answer to every question is compassion. Let me just kind of step aside. I would like for it to be a different answer. I'm not going to can we just kind of put the churchy preacher thing aside for a second? I would love for it to be a different answer. Compassion meaning suffering with. I would love for it to be something else. And we can sometimes pretend that it's some other version of life. The answer to every question is compassion. And then he writes, and if you can create enough communities of compassion, it pretty much solves the social dilemmas that plague us. This for me is a clarification of what we're here to do, to create communities of compassion, to suffer with one another, to be in it, to do right things and try to consistently do better things, and to do that in a long-term commitment to one another until we're made whole again. And this is, in fact, what Jesus did. He just reordered every kind of relationship. If you think about it, I'm pretty much sort of kind of work the opposite of Jesus, I think. I sometimes think of the world out here and then figure out how to navigate it, and then it sort of just gets overwhelming, and I can't hold all of that. Jesus started very small, right, with his own relationship with God, and then in concentric circles outward. And you realize he had 3 people, Peter, James, and John, who he invested in sort of soul friends, people that he was able to share all of life with. And then his main influence was on a relatively small group of people, right? That does not seem super efficient, does it? To create a community where they learned how to treat one another the way God had treated them until they were made whole, and that was through failure and struggle and them not getting it, through rain, sleet. Jesus had a wider circle of influence that he sent out to be part of his mission when he sent out 2 by 2, maybe 70 or so. He also spoke to the masses, so it wasn't like he had no public persona or influence. But mostly it was about those smaller concentric circles of influence. And in that space, Jesus did something different, didn't he? He embodied something that was different. He pretty much trusted that if he did those relationships a certain way, it would grow and would affect things. And so he said things like, let the little children come to me, and reordered our valuing system. He said, blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the peacemakers. And helped us see the upside down nature of the kingdom. He said, pray for your enemies and bless those who persecute you. He ate with tax collectors and touched lepers and healed people on the Sabbath, just to make the point that relationship was more important than rules. And when his revolution of relationship upset the religious and political powers of the world, he chose us over himself. And this is the Lenten discovery. So committed was God to this singular plan that he would die on the cross. Often I'm tempted to start from the places where I have the least influence and then become disillusioned. Jesus started where he had the most influence relationally, and he started a revolution. Jesus showed us what it means to be God, but he also shows us what it means to be human. And I wonder sometimes if that's not the harder part. Social holiness calls us to something together that creates these concentric circles of community until wholeness becomes our way of life. The United Methodist Church has in its sort of writings, its teachings, some help here. Again, sort of a way to understand what we're doing together without having to recreate it all ourselves. We have a social creed and social principles, and I'm going to read all of those now, and it's going to take a little while, so hope you weren't planning for lunch today. No, I just wanted to mention those because you could go and do a little bit of reading on your own if you wanted. Social creed and social principles that help us kind of break the world down into smaller chunks and think about our relationships with one another, learning to be with each other at every level of society like God is with us until we are whole again. What if we were to simply do right things with each other over a long, committed period of time with love and mercy, embodying God's grace, and then letting that slow work of God do its thing? What would that look like? Well, in many ways, I think the Foundry Christian Community Center is an example. As we said, there's some right things to do here. And it took us a year, by the way. The Foundry kind of got started. Some of you know the story. And then it was sort of unclear what to do. And I think this is an important part of the story. Like, sometimes you just get started, right? And then you figure it out. And maybe that was a little messy, but there was a point where about a year or so into it, we found ourselves at the altar over at the Greenwood campus. The idea had started out here in the MAC, and then we were at Greenwood with several of the people that had gotten pulled in, and we were praying, and someone said, "Don't fret small beginnings." And we said, "What should we do?" And we said, "We don't know." So we entered into about a year-long process of discovery, and the vision for the Foundry grew out of that time. What's amazing to me is 15 years later, people who don't know that story, who are involved with the Foundry now, will walk in the door and they say, "The Foundry is about this." And it's the same exact words that were prayed over so many years ago. The Foundry is one example of what happens when you do this work together and build a community that has influence growing out. One of the people there is Shauna Wood, who is the director now, who moved into the neighborhood and who embodies not only the right things that the Foundry is doing, as you'll see, but the heart of God in it, God's hesed, long-term committed love and faithfulness, and a passion that is contagious. And so if you think, or maybe wonder, is there anything that you can do? I think Shauna is a great example of how we should all be encouraged. Let's watch together.
My name is Shauna Wood. I'm the executive director at the Foundry Christian Community Center, where we know that talent is universal, but opportunity is not. At the Foundry, our mission is to raise up leaders, and we do that through education, health and wellness, and spiritual formation. People often ask, well, what does that look like? So that means we open our doors early in the morning for full day preschool, Monday through Thursday. Then as soon as our preschoolers are leaving the door at 3 o'clock, we're opening them back up for our after-school kiddos arriving on school buses from local elementary schools. We do snack, we have fun games and homework help. Then just as they are leaving, we're opening the doors again for the community. We also have community wraparound services, and we provide supports because we know that if a child is hungry or if a child doesn't know where they're going to sleep at night, they're not going to be able to focus during the day on learning those academics. On the second Saturday of every month from 10 to noon, we offer free community events. It's an exciting opportunity to open the doors for our neighbors so that our students are coming, their families, their extended families, their friends. So if we can catch kids early on, ideally starting at like age 3, and work with them all through their 3-year-old and 4-year-old period, then when they're 5 and they're starting kindergarten, they're starting on good footing. You can look at the data that's out right now, and you can do fantastic things starting with early childhood. But if you will engage the parents so that you have 2 generations engaged at once, and we have a lot of families where it's the children, the parents, and the grandparents even. If you can engage all 3 generations, your ability to grow dynamic leaders and to break through that cycle of poverty is amazing. We officially start engaging with these families when their kids are 3 and they enroll in preschool, but our goal is to walk with that family until that child is all the way in college or a career. I recently was talking to one of our families. She's a single mom, and she has 2 kiddos, and she started having her kids when she was fairly young. So she is just now that her kids are both in elementary school to the place that she has gone back to college to get a degree. And she was telling me about, she could not take her afternoon classes. She could not do the internship that she now has with the city if it wasn't for our after school program. Because, sorry, she's not worried about her kids. She knows her kids are in a safe place where they are being loved. And that empowers her to focus on what she needs to do to raise their whole family up. Another one of our moms recently texted me. Her child went through our preschool program and is now with us during the after school program. Let me tell you what she said. The Foundry has helped my family and I by my son having a place to go with teachers that I trust until I get off work. A lot of people have a village to help out with their kids. The Foundry is my village. I love to hear that people consider the Foundry their village, because that is what we want to be. So we need a lot of partners to do this amazing work. And I'm looking for partners right now who are willing to share their time, their talent, and their treasure. So if you have time to come volunteer, to be a part of one of our monthly community events, or to say, hey, I can show up for an hour or 2 once a week and interact with the kids, we need your help. We need your help if you have a talent. Right now, we are building a new honeydew ministry, and I need some fellas and some gals out there who have the ability to fix light fixtures when they go out, or help us when the bathroom stall is about to fall off its hinges. And it takes treasure, it takes finances to make a program like this work. We are so good at pinching pennies, but it still takes some pennies to get this thing going. It costs approximately $10,000 a year for one preschooler to have a year of preschool. That $10,000 investment is going to change the trajectory of that child's entire life, their earning potential, and what they give back to the community. But we have to have that initial amount to make this work happen. And to those of you who have supported the Foundry, thank you. Thank you for making all of this work possible. None of our kids have graduated high school yet, but we have a lot of preschool graduates who are doing great things in elementary school and now even in middle school. And I hope that you just take a moment to appreciate the fact that you have changed a child's life.
Started with a question: what if we were to love the children in the west end of our city until we love them like our own children, until we realize they are our children? And what if we were to do the same kind of questioning with each other? What if we were to love one another as if we were brothers and sisters until we discovered that we're all children of God? It's not super complicated, but it does take a commitment to social holiness, to being in this with God and with one another in a way that maybe we didn't realize when we signed up for it. But Jesus gives us the example, the level of commitment and grace that it takes, and has offered that as our starting point. It's where we begin. And so as we come to a time of offering, let's invite the ushers forward and just enter into a moment of reflection, a Lenten reflection for just a second. As we ask ourselves, what is required of us? What does God want us to do? Let's pray together. God, as we offer ourselves, the offering time is really a chance to give our gifts, but also to re-up for the mission. That mission of reordering all of our relationships like Jesus did, our own relationship with you, our relationships with the people closest to us, our intimate, very close relationships, of maybe recognizing that there's going to be 10 or 12 people that we're going to have the most influence on in this life, and who are they, and what am I doing? What's the right thing to do? How do I show commitment and act justly and love mercy and walk humbly with you as I walk through life with them? How might that influence our wider influence in our community or in our job? And ultimately, how might that be part of the bigger thing that you're doing in the world through your church? God, would you reveal to us maybe one relationship that could redefine what that kind of faithfulness looks like? One small step, maybe just one small act, something to do, maybe to reach out, maybe to have a conversation, maybe to say, hey, I need somebody to go deeper with. I need somebody to share my life with. I need a friend who will pray for me. Maybe it's just to kind of show up for small group or a growth group this week and be ready to just be present and hopeful again. Maybe it's just a walk in the door, and that's enough for now. But God, give us a grander vision for our lives and for our world. Would you give us hope and encouragement that small acts of kindness and compassion matter? Would you help us just to keep at it and to find your faithfulness sparking our faithfulness to each other? Would you renew the earth by renewing us? Would you bless us so that we might be a blessing? May these moments, these last moments here together, be a chance to find ourselves renewed in your presence as we start our week and as we give thanks, because you are good and your love endures forever. It's in this we pray and worship. Amen.